So, welcome to the Glorious Debris podcast. I'm Milton Dixon. I'm here with
Gracie Yoder.
And we're here to talk about lots of stuff.
Basically what we're talking about is hierarchy as a concept an acceptable one for the new culture that we're trying to create? Like, does it have any space? My supposition is that it does not, and that it's rooted in violence and abuse and is not life-affirming as a concept. And then we're talking about how people will take issue with actively banishing a term or a concept like hierarchy because they don't have anything to replace it with. Like, because there's natural stuff like order.
Networks.
Yeah, there are ways that we make sense of our world and order our world, and I guess we're trying to make the case for a distinction between those concepts and hierarchy.
And we're defining hierarchy as taking a natural order and reorganizing it in a way that is unnatural, right? Moving something ahead of the others when it shouldn't be or isn't. And that brings violence and pain and suffering onto the other elements that would have been previously above it or on a level playing field with it. And now that element that has been elevated, it's not reality. It's not the actual state of affairs.
Well, I think what's interesting is that it can be reality. We see that. Like, these concepts hold the real power of an action in our life.
But what's happening is it's not reality in the sense that if we let go of that idea, it would revert back to this other order, right? So it takes effort to maintain that order. That effort is always in terms of domination, exploitation, control, like damaging or exploiting.
All the key elements of civilization.
All the key elements of civilization, right. That's right.
So if we're charged with creating a permanent culture, then addressing these internal hierarchies and this dysfunctional way of thinking about life is really foundational to the effort.
Right.
And I think that's the big thing, is like we have to crack this. And if we're talking about creating life-affirming systems and a new culture, but we're still playing a hierarchical game and not calling it out at every chance we can get, then we're probably not working effectively.
Yeah, I was thinking that if we're going to create something new, if our culture is not permanent as it stands, and we're going to step into a permanent culture, we probably have to do some things differently. If we're not doing things differently, if we're reverting back to some of our old habits, old ways of looking at the world, then we're not going to move into that permanent culture. We're going to be stuck in the old culture. And it's scary to kind of let some of those things go because there's a certainty to them. The certainty that you're going to oppress the rest of the world in order to get your needs met. Whereas when you step into that, you're kind of letting go a little bit and there's an uncertainty. Is it going to work?
Well, and it needs to not ignore the fact that we do live in a hierarchical system that will oppress us if we don't play the game. So you have to, it's complicated. We have to hold all of that. So an example of trying to shift out of a hierarchical way of living into one that's more permanent. And we were just talking about this earlier with like what's happening with me, you, Jesse, like professionally, quote unquote. How it hasn't manifested in more money or material, like, we're taking care of ourselves, but there's always this compromise that's happening. The work that we actually know we need to do goes against.
When we were outside and talking about profit versus values, profit is a value, and if that's the only value, then
or like profit's almost the rejection of values, which is a value.
Maybe profit. Well, no.
Because people get to say, but this culture, it's not personal. It's just business, right? There's all these like lines that are provided by the culture,
right,
that make it that essentially their job is to excuse the lack of value and care in a situation.
Right. Well,
and that's
of other value.
Profound to me.
Of other value, right? So it's the profit over everything else.
Yeah,
right? The lack of
and
care.
and then these like slogans come out,
right,
because people like I think can feel that it's butting up against like something that would be better and life affirming and care for people,
right?
And then they're asked basically to like suspend that, and just business.
Well, so let's talk specifically about one example is how we approach the microgreens in market. Right?
Yeah, that's a very good specific example.
So we do toe the line of the culture. We have prices available.
We have to actually buy seed and soil.
We have to participate in all that. But we're breaking that cycle of like passing on the exploitation in some ways by saying you can pick your price. That if you're thinking about the effort that we've put into this, that how much it's costing us, what your need is, and your ability to pay, that you should be able to pick your own price.
And we have a line about how we trust you. So then it's about relationship and trust and getting everybody's needs met versus some product and what resources you have to give us.
And essentially the profit.
Right.
The profit. It removes that profit element from it.
The other thing also is the fact that, so we have that line, which is cool, but so that's like maybe the height of our attempt at subverting the process. But we also intentionally keep our prices low and go to market, and like would probably still go to market even if we just broke even, because it's not actually about making money there.
It's about
because if we were doing business for the microgreens wisely, then what would it look like? Wisely, according to the dominant culture,
we'd probably be suffering in terms of trying to amp up production, trying to meet our production goals, how much we sell. We'd probably even ditch the local community in favor of businesses or
restaurants,
higher end markets.
Yeah. We'd go outside of the zone looking for the money. We would have amped up the prices of our product, expanded the operation, which would have taken us away from other activities that we do that are connecting and improve our quality of life. It would have been about money and work.
But we're about creating value for the entire system, right? Creating value for not just ourselves financially. There's no doubt that the microgreens do drive the engine of this larger farm effort that we're doing.
Yeah.
But
it's I guess that kind of gets into what we're talking about. Like, how can you reject hierarchies and still play the game? So like, we can't ignore the fact that we're in this predicament and that we have bills to pay and that I can't actually grow this farm without some capital, financial capital specifically, to do it. So how can we safeguard ourselves and move towards the permanent culture in a situation like that, right? Where you just have to kind of make sense of what the heck you're doing, pay your bills,
that's right,
but you still want to move towards that permanent culture. I think how you do it, first of all, you reject those internal hierarchies. You call them out, create a dialogue around them, check in, try to reject abusive mindsets. But then you have to replace them with something. And we have replaced them with like kind of in progress value seeking, right?
value seeking. That's a good way to put it.
Because we're not there yet. Like, we still keep weeding out, and we need to maintain an attitude of humility about it because we're like steeped in abusive stuff. We're abusive creatures, and that's part of rejecting it is acknowledging that it's in us, and we've been like.
We're going to continue to learn about things that we need to change about what we're doing, right?
Yeah, right. So we have to stay open to that and keep like taking a personal inventory.
Or even going into it knowing that something is not sustainable, is not adding value, like where we get our seeds from. That's exploitative, right? There are companies that are exploiting nature in order to produce the seed for us. And at some point that could very easily end. If we were to have to do that all on our own, there's no way that we would be selling microgreens.
The current system crashes, the microgreens like cease to be a thing that we're doing because there really aren't very many sustainable elements in it. Aside from just like seed and soil being like a cool thing. The production end of almost everything is... There are enough
sustainable things, or enough, that's a bad word.
It just wouldn't be worth the energy if the current system crashed. But the point I think that we were kind of coming around to is that we can hold the complicated nature of what we're working with and the kind of moral compromises that we're going to have to make. We can still call them out as bad. Like the example of car culture. Like, cars are in no way sustainable. Not a chance. They're polluting, they kill people. Yeah, they get us from point A to point B, but like, what even for? To go to work? Like,
to participate in the larger culture.
Right. So it's just like, we can just basically, from our perspective, say cars equal bad and they need to go away. But we still have to use them in this culture. So we can talk about cars being bad, we can talk about that reality, and then we can like still get in the car and go. But the things that we can do are say, am I using the car and contributing to car culture to try to like go the direction I want to go with it? So like, we take our car to run microgreen deliveries and to make ends meet, right? To get to work and pay our bills and like keep going. But we're acknowledging that it's a compromise, that it's not morally perfect, that we don't live in a world where we can even attain that. So it's not excusing it, but it's just like inhabiting the truth of that situation. And I think that's a huge barrier for people. I often feel like people get caught in these binary.
It's cognitive dissonance.
Are like, it's cognitive dissonance. It's painful to acknowledge that we live in like a really unsustainable, abusive way, and then like keep doing it, which is good. Like, we have to inhabit our discomfort and our grief about it. But then let's use that discomfort and grief to inform the values of the future, right? And then those values, if we keep inhabiting the grief and then cycling back to the value process, the process of creating these new values, then I believe if we keep enacting those values and then meeting the grief and then going back and enacting the values and meeting the grief, then we'll like be chipping away at it. But so like that, it's that process of growth in value making that will probably, I think, create the world, or even just the tools for making the world that we want.
It's in progress. The things of civilization that are killing the world are not going to go away overnight. The things that will replace them are not going to come to us overnight. We're not going to just be able to put down one and start another. There's an integration, an overlapping of those two things.
Yeah.
And to some extent, we have to maintain the things that don't make sense in the current culture because they do make sense in a permanent culture.
Right, that cognitive dissonance, I think we need to like tell people that it's okay to be confused, to grieve the fact that you have to participate in a culture you don't agree with. You know, feel all of that. Like, because if we don't feel all of it, then we're not doing ourselves any favors in terms of figuring out where to go from there.
Right.
So I think people staying away from these psychological traps where you have to justify your way of life and pretend that it's moral one way or the other.
We're chained to car culture. There's no, like, getting out of car culture is such a burden. If I reorganize,
it would actually be stupid for a lot of people to not drive their cars.
It's me and you. I think if both of us said, we're giving up car culture, we're going to walk everywhere, that would drastically change my life and the things that I'm able to do. And I know that if I choose not to drive, it's not going to impact the overall situation. But if I drive and create the parallel culture at the same time, that's, I think, more beneficial than the alternative of giving up the car and not creating a second culture. Right?
Well, so what would you say to people who are like kind of latch onto those arguments about like lifestyleism? Because, and the argument usually goes, if everybody made that choice though, if everybody decided to reject cars, then it would be different, right? So you're just thinking in a defeatist kind of way.
It's a strategic way because everybody's not going to reject car culture.
Not with that attitude.
That's not going to happen.
Right.
Too much of our way of life depends on car culture.
Yeah.
That to reject it would be to punish yourself and punish the things that you love, punish the things that you're able to do. You would lose the ability to affect some change in the world. You'd be at a disadvantage to the larger culture.
Right. Well, and then there's the other thing that cars are only one facet of the destructive culture. There's like a whole huge long list of all the things that you'd have to change in your lifestyle. And so I think that's kind of where I'm leading, is it's not about making all the right choices, because that is not acknowledging the existing power structures that are there, and if you really whittle it down, will maintain this way of life through force if necessary. Like there's laws that uphold classism,
you lose
racism.
Your kids if you give up cars.
Right.
It's kind of the
maybe not, maybe you'd be lucky, but like if everybody gave up cars, like the system would be so challenged that I have no doubt that the muscle behind civilization would rise up and get people to keep participating.
Or find some alternative that's worse.
Yeah, maybe. And that's just we're just kind of guessing, but I feel pretty certain that people could not give up this way of life voluntarily without some kind of a backlash from like law enforcement. And I think people might think that's absurd, but when you look at the reality of our current system, then just because we're kind of removed from that reality of violence doesn't mean it doesn't currently exist to uphold the system, because our cell phones, just another tool of civilization, if you follow the trail all the way back, it's just straight up slavery and bloodshed in another country.
Not just
and environmental slavery, degradation.
Everything that we do is rooted in the cars being, one example of it. Cell phones, computers, electricity. All the man-made materials that were brought here have some root in that exploitation.
Right.
You may remove yourself from one aspect of it, and all the other aspects will remain.
Right. It's also like a little bit of an issue with not seeing your privilege too. Like if we suppose that just simple lifestyle shifts are all that's needed to right the world, then are we like doing right by the people who are actually enslaved in DR Congo to produce,
the coltan for your cell phone?
Like if we just pretend that the situation we find ourselves in is just about people in the first world just not making all the right decisions, it doesn't do justice to the depth of the problem. Because we all know that the reason that there are people enslaved a world away is not because everybody here is just a shithead. That's not why. It's overly simplistic thinking, And it's like what we were talking about earlier about calling out the symptom and pretending it's the cause, the root, when it's not really. So dealing with symptoms is important.
Alleviating the suffering from those symptoms.
Calling them out, using them as clues.
Right. But not addressing the root cause and just going after the symptoms still leads you to the destructive behaviors in the end. Right. If this is a medical situation and we just worked on the symptoms and didn't address the root cause, you could still have a dead patient.
Right.
In the end, right?
So maybe that's the kind of what we're talking about with like,
I think it is.
Why can't everybody just reject car culture? Well, because that's just calling out like
a symptom.
One symptom. Like, yeah, we want to deal with that. We want to talk about it. It is part of the whole picture, but it's only an indicator, of a larger problem. And if we pretend that it's the whole problem, then we're actually doing a disservice to the process of figuring out how to heal. Because we're not like figuring out where the source of the infection is. So we're still just in progress, right? We're trying to just maintain some level of like humility here. Try to bring ourselves back to like, well, okay, we don't know it all. We have these limited senses. We live in this world that like really puts blinders on us. We just don't even have the ability to know what's right. But we need to try. We need to do something.
Right.
So if we just see a kernel of truth, like where what we've cracked into is we're saying hierarchies and hierarchical way of thinking, it indicates abuse structures. And if we want a world that's not abusive, then we have to replace that with something that's more functional, more life-affirming. So what do we replace hierarchies with? Relationship. Yeah, I think that relationship is the antidote to any hierarchy.
It really does subvert a lot of the cause and effect of hierarchy.
So if we can think of an example of how that would be put into action, a formerly hierarchical way of doing something replaced with a relationship-based way of doing it. So, okay, maybe an example is like what permaculture is trying to do on a farm.
So that would be going from subjugating the landscape. Maybe you're a farmer and you have a corn and soy rotation, and you're basically...
So you're feeding into an existing hierarchy, usually basically by force. Like farmers these days don't have...
Oh.
If they want to pay off the...
Chemical weapons or brute force in terms of plowing the soil, right? To keep your corn and soy rotation up, you're going to, year after year, expend energy to subjugate the ground, to bring it back to this early state of succession.
I also want to validate the situation that farmers find themselves in, because I used to kind of think these farmers just like didn't care about the land, but they come from stock of like people who lived in place and like inherited these farms. They care about their land and they care about their health and the health of the earth and their families. They find themselves in this situation because industry came in, incentivized this shift in model, promised them some level of abundance through the hierarchical model. But people, we know what that's like to fall prey to that kind of logic. So that happened, and then it set forth a domino effect that now, like, so the sort of unspoken violence that's being perpetrated on our farmers is that they will, almost all of them will like lose their farms and their homes and their businesses if they don't play this game, because they're so in debt from all the machines. Like they have to go into debt every single year just to get their crops in. So I just wanted to like say that, because it's, again, people will latch onto like, ooh, it's just those bad individuals making bad choices, and it's like the system so overly simplistic
drove them there. People that care about their lands, care about their families, and the system that they had to engage with basically pushed them into
subservience to the hierarchy,
civilization, right?
They're
So they could go from this corn soy rotation model, it's the standard here in the Midwest, right? I mean, even like a 1%. You know, if they just said, look, this little bit of land, I'm going to start to create value in the land for its own sake, to give back to the system.
So we're talking about how to take a formerly hierarchical situation.
Right.
Which I think we've really illustrated how, like, the modern American farm, like, monocrop, high energy, big machines, lots of chemicals. How do we reframe that to be life affirming and, like, non-hierarchical? And maybe it's not totally possible because people are really trapped, right? So we're going to have to inhabit that. But let's just, like, go with ideals and say, just to inform the values, not even to enact it, like, and create perfection, but, like, what would perfection look like? And then,
well, the domination and control model of corn and soy, chemicals, plowing, right? That kind of general thing. Kind of the opposite would be to turn to allowing the land to progress on its own. So away from the domination is to reset succession, letting it move through succession towards, you know, maybe something like a food forest in that direction, remineralizing so that the nutrients are there long term, right, rather than being applied continuously.
So, like, we take that current system and say, okay, where are the elements of abuse and domination, and, like, how can we pull that out? And then, like any relationship, you say, okay, how do I get my needs met in this?
What does the land need? What do I need?
Yeah.
Where is there space for the land and for the creatures that live in the land, be they plants or animals? And where is the balance for what I need versus what the land needs to continue to progress?
Yeah, so I think I misspoke earlier saying, like, what would the idealized vision be? I don't even think we should go there. I think it all has to be, like, ground floor, like, value assessment.
Ground floor would be to take that farming model and devote a small portion of the land that was previously under that domination and allow it to regenerate and become healthy for the sake of the land and not just for profit.
Which is really just the removal of those abuse parameters. Right? And then it's kind of like, well, okay, what are we doing here?
Right, and well, then
Who are you? Let me get to know you.
You get to reassess then completely, like, what you're doing with that land and what your relationship is with that land, and where the, in quote, farming activities take you, right? And, like, how that land is in relationship to not just you, the farmer, but to the community around it.
And that's actually, so talking about, like, land use, that's one of the ways in which I've seen kind of a damaging chasm between farmers and, like, environmentalists. So either way, it doesn't actually engage in the relationship. So you've got, like, this farmer that's doing this aesthetic of control everywhere.
Right.
And then on the other hand, you've got these, like, environmentalist movements that still kind of take humans out of the picture. It's like nature needs to exist in this, like, preserve, and humans can't really interact with it aside from a few, like, prescribed ways. And we're still making all kinds of, like, judgments about what it needs to do and what should be growing there and what should be living there. Right? So there's still elements of control that we haven't weeded out. But then the big piece that's missing in both models is that we're not in full relationship with it. And I think in order to be in full relationship with it, we actually have to be talking about how to get our needs met. So we're not these observers or these puppeteers. We're neither. We're, like, a part of it. We're animals in a place. So what would that look like? Yeah, but I think that that's kind of the bridge that's trying to be created in the permaculture movement.
Right.
Getting the Earth's needs met and getting people's needs met.
We're participants. We are not observers. I think that was it. And we are not the puppeteers. We're participants. Yeah. That's a whole different way.
Yeah, and like any relationship, we're going to have to actively work on it and say when we're wrong and
we'll be wrong sometimes.
Allow
say
it to
when
change.
We're wrong.
It's not going to be static.
Right. Allow it to move through whatever stages it needs to.
But relationship as a replacement word for hierarchy or in any of these situations gives us a whole vocabulary that's really different.
Changes things.
Ha 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 ha!